It turned out Nathaniel didn't talk much. After he had told them they were currently in Virginia and that he could lead the way to Mexico, he had been mostly silent. The typical arrogant jackass demeanor seemed only to be active when talking to people. Still, Marius observed him closely night and day as they traveled. He had even forbidden the cowboy from approaching Armand. The stallion had shot him a puzzled glance, and sometimes Marius suspected that animal to be more intelligent than many of the humans he had met until now. Also, had he refused to sit on one horse with the American twat. Luckily, Nathaniel's dead companions had horses, and each of the travelers could ride their own now. Slowly, Marius steered Armand next to Dean. "Do we have to keep him much longer?" he whispered ominously, peeking towards the human in front of them, sitting on his grey-white spotted horse. "Why? Did he insult you by being a faithful Christian?" Dean retorted with a bright smile. "He is a nuisance and an insufferable jerk." "I don't know. He is full of himself, smiles arrogantly, and he is a rebel upsetting the natural order. I really have no idea why you two should not get along." Dean still grinned mockingly at Marius. Knowing there was no getting rid of said jerk, Marius gave up, but not without playfully threatening his friend. "Just you wait until I find an opportunity for payback." With that said, he fell silent again, staring daggers at the man in front of them. That's how it went most days. Nathaniel would ride ahead in silence, and they would follow. Often enough, the weather would be dry, so they could rest without worries under the open sky. On the other hand, it would also rain often enough, forcing them to look for shelter, or if there was none to be found, they would have to ride on through the night. Marius had to admit, for a female, Melissa was tough. Not once did he hear her complain or cry, even if life right now was a rocky path. He knew she was scared from time to time. He had seen her that night he had saved the couple from being riddled with bullets. She only hid it very well. The demon tilted his head while he looked at her. Love always had been a riddle to him. It did make humans do foolish things to save those they loved. Seeing the sun set once again at the horizon, Marius' thoughts went back to the thorn in his side. He could have found the temple just as well on his own without dragging this twit along. When they made camp, Dean let Nathaniel take care of the fire. Marius assumed it was because Dean didn't want to work any spells when their new companion was watching. Of course, it was foolish. Nobody could have overseen the giant lightning striking conveniently in the middle of town out of nowhere. But the older man didn't seem to care. He kept to himself. It wasn't different this time. After the fire was lit, Nathaniel sat down and observed the wilderness. He obviously didn't want to bother nor be bothered. He even barely ate, which explained his worn appearance. Dean had made attempts to interact as humans did, but their guide didn't respond to that. After knowing what to do, he hadn't asked any questions, not even about Dean being English. It struck Marius as odd. Most humans could barely contain their urge to pry. The demon wasn't sure if the man simply was that cold, or if the closing off was self-protection. Deciding to stop overthinking, Marius lit a cigarette, longing for a drink to accompany the smoke. His eyes were closed as he heard Dean's footfalls to get the usual meal from the bag. "Our provisions are running low. We'll have to pick something up tomorrow." "There's a town on our way," came Nathaniel's answer from the shadow, followed by the disgusting sound of him spitting. Dean took 2 cans for him and Melissa and threw a third at the man next to Marius. Nathaniel caught it but didn't eat. "Oi," the demon said, offering him a cigarette. Not because he was so fond of the self-loving idiot, but hopefully he would stop chewing and start smoking. Nathaniel only eyed him before answering. "I got it covered." "Chewing that stuff makes you look like a bandit," Marius scolded him. "What do you think I am?" He replied wearily. "A cutthroat son of a bitch," the demon answered smoothly, savoring every word. Nathaniel only scoffed at the insult. "You don't know me, son." Showing no sign of emotional reaction, Nathaniel turned back to his previous task. Menelaus, however, had noticed a hint of restlessness in the man's behavior. It was another strange thing about him. The further west they came, the more paranoid he seemed to become. This night was no different. Dean and Melissa slept soundly in each other's arms, exhausted from the rough life they did have little time to prepare for. Menelaus watched the dancing embers when Nathaniel suddenly woke up, as if startled by something. The sound of panting slightly came from where the American had slept. Usually he would toss from side to side, but he would at least sleep. In the last days he had started to barely sleep at all. He would start from sleep and check the surroundings with his gun at the slightest sound. When he heard the silent steps passing by, he thought about telling him to just be still. At the last moment he chose another approach. Gripping Nathaniel's arm, he only whispered, "You were a soldier." He could literally feel the other man's heart drop and hair bristle, but the tone hadn't changed from before when he shot back. "How would you know?" "I've seen my fair share of poor sorts." Menelaus looked up, aware of how his eyes sometimes glowed in the dark. He knew he unsettled Nathaniel, who presumed the knight to be his ally. Still masking his alarm, the cowboy continued, returning the insult. "Where?" he laughed, without any humor. "In London? Among the rich and wealthy?" The sudden bitterness reminded Menelaus a bit of himself, causing him to soften his gaze. "We may be more alike than either of us assumes." With a jerky motion, Nathaniel freed himself from the demon's grip and walked away. Of course, Menelaus thought. Not long ago there had been a war between the states. As Nathaniel had said, they passed through a town on the next day. The sky was cloudy and the wind blew with force, making hair and coats flutter violently. Menelaus had to hold his head in fear of losing it. None of them wanted to be around for too long out of various personal reasons. Therefore they agreed that two would get to the store and two water the horses. Dean, of course, objected to the idea of sending Melissa with Nathaniel, but everyone knew Menelaus and Nathaniel would never make it to the store together and well. And in Menelaus' own opinion, Dean and Nathaniel didn't mix too well either, since the American had approached their female companion. After more or less seeing reason, Dean stayed behind with the demon. "Cheer up, mate. You still have little old me." Menelaus patted him on the back. Menelaus knew what his friend bothered. He had seen how naturally charming the cowboy could be around women. "Don't worry," he said sincerely. "Melissa has only one heart, and that she placed in your hands a long time ago." The store didn't look much different from the one Melissa had been in Virginia. Not that she expected to. As long as it had what she needed, everything was fine. Nathaniel hadn't spoken since they were alone, which was odd considering the first time he had introduced himself to her. Not that she minded. Dean was her world. Still, something about Nathaniel seemed strange in the past days. Or perhaps he had been strange the day they had met, and this was his usual personality. She had never met Americans. She had presumed they had to be similar to people in Britain. They had the same roots, after all. Melissa stood with her back to the door as the three men entered. She didn't pay attention at first, but when the man recognized Nathaniel, her blood ran cold. "There's money on your head, Nathaniel." One of the men spoke, probably the leader. Slowly Melissa turned around. The three strangers were clothed in the same manner as Nathaniel. They obviously made a living in the same way their companion did. "You want to shoot me in a store?" Nathaniel asked with that cocky smile which bordered to arrogance. "I would," the man replied without remorse. "But he warned you alive." Nathaniel grabbed behind his back, probably out of habit, realizing he had left the rifle with the horses. She heard a silent curse. The man in front of them raised his own revolver to Nathaniel's brow. No tricks. Another man took Nathaniel's coat. Now you two come with us. You'll have to shoot me first. I ain't going. The two men stared at each other for what felt like eternity. You walk, he turned with the gun to Melissa, or I'll shoot her and then your legs. Melissa saw him clench his fist at the threat. She was certain the promise of her death was the only thing to make him submit at that moment. The men tied their hands and pushed them outside. By the time they heard Melissa call out, Dean sat on the ground and was balancing a small fire he had managed to summon on his hand. Marilyse knew something was wrong at the first second by the way of how her voice sounded high-pitched with fear. Dean jumped to his feet at once. Only the quick reflexes let the demon catch the man before exposing them both. They have Melissa, he hissed. Yes, and they will have you too, unless you stay down. Cautiously, they peeked over the backs of the horses. 3 strange men, clothed like beggars, had taken Melissa and Nathaniel and tied them up. Can't you just snap away their bullets or something? Dean was visibly struggling to not just charge over there and do something stupid. They're too far away. Marilyse muttered, equally angered as the bandits urged their horses into a gallop. Since when are demons limited by that? When the demon ignored the young man, Dean grabbed Marilyse's shoulder, forcing him to stand face to face. Dean's eyes mirrored his own despair of being unable to help. I am, he exclaimed in frustration, staring into Dean's eyes. Marilyse knew his companion waited for an explanation, so he turned to go. Marilyse, you are a demon. I've seen demons do worse things from a greater distance. Marilyse turned back to Dean, but avoided his eyes. Dean, my powers, they are nothing. Nothing compared to what they once were. What do you mean? It's complicated. The demon locked eyes with Dean. Do you trust me? More than the last time we had a disagreement, at least, Dean said with an awkward smile. Marilyse didn't know if this was a compliment, but he grinned back in a sincere manner. Then trust me when I say I can't tell you. Dean nodded slightly. This is no time to fight. Melissa could die any minute. How do we find her? Marilyse smirked in anticipation of what would come next. Now that's something I can accomplish with a wink. They rode for an hour before stopping in front of what seemed to be an abandoned house. The man led them into the house with the same rough pushes. Inside, Melissa and her companion were directed into a small room. One of the men took his gun and stood in the door watching them. If you wanted some time with me, you should have brought whiskey, Nathaniel yelled out before Melissa could silence him with a look. What are you doing? She whispered, still shaking from head to toe. The explanation came as the leader answered. I think you misunderstand. I'm just here for the money. But a certain Captain Thompson wanted to speak to you. Melissa saw how the color vanished from Nathaniel's face and his eyes started burning with pure hatred. Thought you might know him. The man chuckled and disappeared around the corner. Nathaniel, what is he talking about? Melissa prodded, but the man next to her seemed lost in memories. Not giving up, she kneeled in front of him, shaking him by his shoulder with her tied hands. Coming to his senses, Nathaniel looked at her in a way that wrenched her heart. What happened? She asked again, staring straight into his face. The older man averted his gaze. I'm sorry, Melissa. The day we met, I should have just disappeared. Shouldn't been around. Trailing off, he gently pushed away her hands and took a deep breath. Now the captain, he is going to kill me. And I couldn't care less, but I don't know what they're going to do with you. Melissa just wanted to slap him for how nonchalantly he spoke about his death. "You are giving up," she said, trying to comprehend his stupidity. "I have given up a long time ago," he said, defeated. "'Tis time to pay my debt." Before Melissa could scold him for being hopeless, the man outside started arguing. "How long now? I want to be done with that. The instructions were clear. He stay alive, we wait here." "Didn't say anything about the woman, though," the third added in a slight tone. What happened next was too fast for Melissa to consciously react to. One of the men came into the room, grinning at her. "Don't you dare touch her," Nathaniel growled. "Ain't your business, Johnny Reb, but is she your wife?" The man snarled in contempt. Melissa saw a shadow pass over Nathaniel's face as his eyes once again glowed and his face contorted in wrath. The man approached Melissa, who already dreaded what might come next, when the cowboy threw himself between them, tackling the other man to the ground. Someone fired a gun, upon which the fighting men let go of each other. Nathaniel staggered to his feet, standing in front of Melissa, facing their captors. "If you want her," he said, breathing heavily, "you have to go through me." Reluctantly, the man left the room, but not without glaring at him. Looking suddenly weak, the American sank down to the ground next to Melissa. It was then when she saw a red stain on the side of his upper abdomen. "Nathaniel!" But he cut her off without looking at her. "Don't worry. I survived Shiloh Hill. I ain't going to die here." Marius walked into the store Melissa had been abducted in. He looked around to see a man behind the counter and 3 not too bright-looking fellows around the table. "I am looking for a woman who has been here mere minutes ago." Marius placed his hands behind his back as his eyes moved slowly from face to face. He slightly tilted his head as nobody spoke. Humans usually were very cooperative when he spoke and moved like an aristocrat. Perhaps he was interrupted when a rather big and muscular man stood up from the table. "Your friend ain't here English. We don't like outsiders." The man came dangerously close when Marius, bored of how slow things went, just extended his arm. Suddenly the intimidating man gasped for air as his feet lost contact with the ground. Marius glanced at Dean with a smirk before he turned to the cashier with an adjusted voice bare of any warmth. "Look, mate, you tell me what you saw and I will not kill your friend." The gesture had the desired result, since the cashier suddenly remembered every detail. "They were looking for Nathaniel Connor, but took the woman too." "Who are they?" "I don't know." "Where are they?" "I don't know." The man whimpered as Marius grew impatient. "The farm," the man, still struggling for air, screeched. Interested, Marius lowered the man but kept a firm grip on the neck. "There's an abandoned house ain't far from here." "What direction?" "Bit north. You can't miss it." Satisfied, Marius released the man. He kept his promises after all. Dean had already opened the door when the demon turned to leave. Upon crossing the threshold, he called to the people inside. "Ladies and gentlemen, in hell, incompetence like that is punished by mopping the endless hallways." Marius chuckled at the dumbfounded faces after the door was shut. "You mop the floor in hell?" Dean asked with a tone that indicated he still tried to comprehend what Marius had just said. "Of course," the demon smiled. "Just imagine how long it takes in the heat." They quickly mounted the horses and set out to find the house. Hopefully they would not be too late. Nathaniel had dozed off when a man in blue uniform entered the room. Melissa heard the clinking of coins as the men who had captured them got their money. "What about the woman?" one of them asked. "If you caught her with them, then she's part of the deal," the soldier called from the room under his mustache, which showed a few gray hairs. He didn't seem like an evil man. His voice was soft yet firm as he spoke. The mercenaries only cursed under their breath and went their way. They had been all tough before, but they didn't dare to mess with men of the law. Sadly, the triumph didn't last long when the man she presumed to be Captain Thompson ordered his men to take Nathaniel with them. Melissa saw with worry that the stain had grown. Her friend winced as the man under Thompson's command dragged him into the next room and tied him to a chair. "Remember me, Major Nathaniel Connor?" the man said gloatingly in a voice that made Melissa discard her earlier impression. The man in the chair only smiled in a daze. "I only remember an ugly visage begging me to be shot." Nathaniel cried out in pain when Thompson pushed his fingers into the gunshot wound. "Careful, Captain," he added with his usual cocky smile, though his eyes were glazed with pain. "You can't hang a dead body." "Oh, I will see you hang. I will make sure you feel it, Greyback." Thompson paced around the chair where his two men had taken their place to the right and left of the door leading to the room Melissa was still in. She tried to somehow loosen the rope around her hands, but the man had tied it firmly. She watched the soldiers at the door for a moment, who seemed to be completely taken by their vile intent. As silently as she could, she got up and sneaked closer. "We are aware of you not having pledged," Thompson started in a monotone voice, but Nathaniel cut him off. "Don't give me that. Your superiors couldn't care less. You're just pissed, 'cause I managed to escape right under your nose. I guess even those two are just here for the fun of beating a wearer of the grey," Nathaniel said, gesturing with his head towards the soldiers at the door. There was a hatred in his voice Melissa hadn't witnessed from anyone in her entire life. Thompson's response was a hit to the face before he spoke again. "You unleashed war upon us. You betrayed your country, and all you got was a plan for reconstruction." Thompson snapped in a fit of rage that was followed by another hit. Nathaniel spit blood before countering in a steely voice. "What would you have liked to happen? A mass execution? We all got dragged into the bloodshed when you came down shooting at us. You traitors even shot our president." Thompson crouched down to look Nathaniel into the eye. The cowboy didn't blink when he answered in sheer scorn. "Good old Lincoln got what he deserved." Melissa could hear Nathaniel take another hit. "But you know what?" the man in blue bragged with a mad smile while pacing again. "I found purpose. I looked for the man I'd met so often on the field, the one whose oath I should have taken." Melissa stopped dead when one of the men scratched his head before turning his attention back to the two men in front of them. Thompson was just bowing down to look his nemesis into the face once again. "I knew that at least you would face justice," he said with an unsettling grin. "And besides, there's quite a sum on your head. No one is going to miss you." "No, your lot made sure of that," Nathaniel retorted, dry bitterness drenching his voice. With one swift motion, Melissa pulled the gun out of her holster from one of the soldiers and pointed it at the man torturing her friend. The soldier, still owning his gun, aimed at her with equal swiftness. But Melissa didn't pay attention to the man next to her. All she wanted right now was to shoot Thompson, who stood there with the confidence a mortal man shouldn't have. "Melissa, don't." Nathaniel's desperate voice made her look away from Thompson and at her friend. "He'll kill you," he continued, pleading. "What good does it do a dead man when I am shot?" Her voice sounded unnaturally cold in her own ears. "Listen to him, girl, and I might let you go," Thompson said in a manner that suggested they were discussing the weather, but the arrogance only fueled the resentment she had for this man. "Melissa, you can't pull that trigger." Her friend still implored her, visibly struggling to ignore the pain he must have felt at the present moment. "I'm not going to let you die," she retorted with determination as tears started to form in her eyes, blurring her vision. With great effort she kept her legs from trembling as the hopelessness of the situation unfolded in her mind. She couldn't save Nate, even if she might escape with her own life. Days ago she wouldn't have thought it possible, but she would be damned if she abandoned him. "This ain't your fight," he continued. "You don't want to become me." Once again she saw the guilt and grief in his eyes. Slowly she took the gun down, suppressing a sob. She wasn't sure if she cried because she almost shot someone or because she didn't, and thus doomed her friend. "Put her back in the other room," Thompson uttered in a bored tone. "No, let her go. She don't belong here." The men stared at each other for a moment before the captain changed his mind. "Fine. She can go when you're dead." Melissa struggled for a moment when one of the men gripped her arm tightly so she wouldn't escape. "So every lucky bastard having a close encounter with Captain Martin Thompson is on your list. Wasn't killing my brother enough?" Nathaniel spoke hunched over with his head bowed down in defeat. He sounded exhausted, his voice devoid of the fire he did speak with only a minute ago. "Do you know how many of my friends you killed?" Thompson's voice had turned into a dangerous whisper as he returned the accusation. "How many people you killed now, since you decided to become a criminal?" The last sentence seemed to pour oil into an almost extinguished flame as every muscle in Nathaniel's body tensed. And without the ties, Melissa was sure he would have attacked the man in front of him, despite his wound. "Your union made me what I am," he only said through gritted teeth, panting heavily. "You should never have been turned in the first place." Thompson drew a knife from his pocket, thrusting it into Nathaniel's thigh. Marielias and Dean sat between the bushes close to the described abandoned house. 3 horses standing in front of the building confirmed their assumptions. "How do we do it?" Marielias asked, still struggling with the fact that he couldn't just go in there and snap everyone out of existence. "We could sell Bibles and lure them outside. Then you just break their necks." Dean mused while staring at the door with a look that said, "I want these bastards to suffer." "I thought more about, something less subtle, more explosive." Marielias pointed at his friend's chest. "If you can manage, of course." Dean looked beneath his shirt. "It has gotten a few more cracks. I should be fine." The young man's eyes gleamed with murderous intent that somehow amused the demon. "Lovely." Melissa didn't know how long Nathaniel would last with the violent treatment. Her friend had stopped giving cocky answers and just fought to not pass out. Thompson must have noticed too, for he pondered loudly. "When I think about it, I believe I will hang you right here. I don't want you to die on your way to the gallows." He gestured at the wound. "Shame those fools shot you." At a wave, the men untied the cowboy and knotted a rope which they fastened on one of the ceiling's wooden beams. Thompson grabbed Nathaniel by the collar, pulling him into a standing position. "On your feet, soldier," the captain said in the faint voice of a superior, his eyes ablaze with glee. Melissa ran to steady her friend when she saw him sway. He was covered in sweat, and his breath came in short gasps at the effort of standing alone. "Don't worry. It'll all be over soon." He reassured her with the familiar wink, followed by a tongue click. But she knew how dire it was, and she knew that he knew, yet he seemed indifferent to his impending doom. "I am sorry, Nate." Tears welled up and streamed down her face once again as he smiled triumphantly, barely keeping his composure. "It took me to die to get you to call me Nate." A scratching sound made her turn her attention to the door. Thompson seemed to hear it too, for he sent one of his men to take a look. Just before the man could wrap his hands around the doorknob, the wood got ripped apart by an explosion that hurled the soldier through the opposite wall. Melissa had taken Nate down with her to the ground, avoiding the shockwave. Quickly she located the knife Thompson had used to cut the rope around their wrists. Looking around, she saw how the captain had been partly hit, sat against the wall opposite of them. His legs seemed broken as he struggled to get back up and reach his gun. The man investigating the door had hit the ground and remained still in an awkward angle. The last standing man took his Colt and aimed at the smoke. "Excuse me," sounded a familiar voice, accompanied by two yellow glowing eyes in a grey-brown dust cloud. "Do you have a moment to talk about our Savior Jesus Christ?" The slightly sarcastic question was followed by a rifle being fired. The bullet hit the soldier square in the chest, causing him to fall to the ground. "Oops," the demon muttered nonchalantly at the man on the ground, who twitched for a moment before growing still. Dean followed, running as if the devil himself was after him. "Melissa, dear!" He fell to his knees in front of her. "Please tell me you're all right." Cupping her face in his hands, he quickly steadied her before pressing his fiancée to his chest. "Thank the Lord," she only managed to say as her heart skipped a beat upon seeing her laugh. "I don't know what good that does, but if you must insist." Merlice answered by screwing up his face, which made Melissa giggle. Remembering Nathaniel, she freed herself from Dean's tight embrace to look at the man. Her friend coughed, bloody drops marking his trail on the floor as he took the gun from the dead man next to him. Merlice tried to find out how to reload the rifle as Nathaniel stopped him. "No, that Yankee bastard's mine." With shaking hands, he raised the gun and shot Thompson without even a shred of reluctance.